Before we begin, let me pull you into a world where the horizon is never empty. In Ragnar Lothbrok's age, mid-9th century by the best reckoning, everything is ruled by distance. The distance between fjords and open sea, between winter hunger and summer raids, between a farmer's quiet life and a warrior's sudden fame. If you and I lived then, we would measure time in storms and sails, in the creak of oak planks and the iron taste of cold air. We would stand on shingle beaches, watching longships slide into the water like living creatures, their prows carved into snarling beasts. Not because it's pretty, but because fear is a weapon. This story isn't only about battles, it's about the geography that shapes the battles. The narrow Danish straits, the brutal North Sea, the river highways of Francia, and the green, soft coasts of England that look inviting until you step onto them with a sword in your hand. It's about the social machinery behind the violence. The thing, assemblies where disputes become law. The gift-giving that makes loyalties real. The fragile line between king and chieftain. And it's about a man called Ragnar, half history, half legend, whose name becomes a kind of compass for ambition. Whether he was one person or many stitched together by storytellers, the world around that name was absolutely real. So stay close. Picture the smoke from hearth fires, the sting of salt spray on your lips, the low chant of oars in the dark. If you were there, you wouldn't just witness history. You'd feel it pressing into your bones. Quick channel note before the journey. If you're enjoying this kind of immersive documentary-style storytelling, subscribe to the channel and hit like on this video. It genuinely helps us keep making the next chapters. Your support is how this series survives. Part 2. The Fjord, where the world begins. If you lived in Ragnar's time, the first thing you'd learn is that Scandinavia isn't one place. It's a web of coasts, islands, and waterways that make you think in routes, not roads. Imagine us on a shoreline where the land rises sharply into pine-covered rock. The water is dark, almost black in winter, and it moves like it has weight. Behind us, longhouses with turf roofs, smoke leaking from roof vents, dogs nosing through snow. Ahead of us, the sea, which is less a view and more a decision. You'd wake before full light because daylight is currency. Inside the longhouse, everything smells of wool, damp wood, and preserved food, dried fish, salted meat, sour ale. People don't romanticize hardship here. They organize around it. The women manage keys, stores, and authority that outsiders often underestimate. The men talk like farmers because most of them are. But when the ship is mentioned, the room changes. The ship is the hinge between survival and wealth. You and I would walk down to the shipyard and see how a raid is built long before it's fought. The Longship isn't a boat, it's technology. Clinker-built planks overlap like scales. The hull is light enough to drag over a beach, sturdy enough to cross open sea, and shallow enough to run up rivers where heavier ships would die. You'd watch craftsmen set rivets, fit the mast, test the steering oar. You'd hear arguments about sailcloth and tar, about whether the keel sits true. This is the part people skip when they jump straight to axes and fire. But in truth, the ship is the first weapon. Now picture the thing, the local assembly held on a rise of ground where voices carry. If you were there, you'd feel how law functions without paperwork. Men stand in circles while disputes are spoken aloud, witnessed aloud, decided aloud. Memory is a legal archive. Reputation is a currency. A man who breaks oaths doesn't just commit a sin, he becomes unreliable, and unreliability is a kind of exile even before anyone says the word. This is where you'd first hear Ragnar's name, spoken with that particular tone, half admiration, half warning. Not a distant king in a palace, but a figure close enough to provoke comparison. In some places, he's a rising war leader with a talent for turning ambition into action. In others, he's already a story used to discipline young men. "Do you think you're Ragnar?" people say, as if the name itself is a boundary, and then the practical questions begin. Where will we sail? West is the obvious answer because west is easier. The North Sea is brutal, but it is direct. Beyond it lie coasts that are rich and, more importantly, organized in ways that make them vulnerable. Monasteries, market towns, river mouths. You would learn to read maps that aren't drawn, the color of water near shoals, the shape of cloud lines that signal land, the flight of seabirds at dawn. The ocean teaches you to notice everything or pay for missing one detail. When spring comes, it doesn't arrive gently. It arrives like permission. Ice breaks, the air softens. Men start checking weapons the way farmers check soil. You'd see shields being repaired, wood covered with leather, painted with simple patterns that make a man recognizable in chaos. You'd hear the ring of iron as blades are sharpened, and you'd realize something uncomfortable. The raid isn't only economic, it is social. A successful voyage can turn a nobody into a man with followers. Failure can erase a reputation in a single season. The night before departure, you and I would stand on the beach with the crew. There's always a moment like this, quiet, not because people are calm, but because they are concentrating on not showing fear. The sea does not care about your courage. The sea only cares about your preparation. You'd feel the Longship shift as it takes weight. You'd see the sail bundled like sleeping muscle. And when the order comes, you'd step in, not as a hero, not as a villain, just as someone entering the bloodstream of the age. Part 2, Westward, England, Soft Shores and Hard Consequences. If you crossed the North Sea with us, you'd learn quickly that distance is felt differently on water. On land, you see progress. At sea, you trust it. Days blur into a rhythm of oars, sail, and lookout shifts. Your hands would crack from salt and cold. Your sleep would be shallow, wrapped in damp wool. And yet, this is important, you'd also feel a kind of freedom that people on farms never touch. Out here, law is thin. Only seamanship is absolute. Then England appears the way a promise appears. Green, rolling, and deceptively gentle. From offshore, the coast looks like it belongs to a softer world. But if you were there, stepping onto a beach with armed men, you'd feel how quickly that softness turns into opportunity and danger. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms are not a single country. They're a patchwork. Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, East Anglia, and more. Their rivalries matter because they determine how fast an alarm spreads, who shows up with soldiers, and whether you can vanish before anyone organizes. People often reduce Viking raids to they attacked monasteries because they were rich. That's true, but it's incomplete. The deeper reason is that monasteries sit at a perfect intersection of wealth, limited defense, and symbolic power. A monastery is a storehouse of silver, food, and trade goods, plus it represents an order that claims divine authority. Strike it, and you steal wealth and send a message. Your God did not protect you. If you were there, you'd see how psychological warfare works without anyone naming it. You would also notice something else. Not every raid is a massacre. Some are calculated theft with minimal killing, because killing slows you down and creates blood feuds that complicate future voyages. But violence is always close, like a knife on the belt. A single raised alarm, a single local thane with enough men, and the beach becomes a trap. Further inland, you'd hear different sounds: church bells, market noise, carts on earth roads. English towns feel older in their bones than Scandinavian settlements. Stone churches, fields divided into strips, written documents carried by clerics. This bureaucracy is strength, but also rigidity. When you raid a structured society, you exploit its predictable responses. And then, if we push deeper into the era that the sagas tie to Ragnar, we enter a darker, bigger phase. Not just raiding, but conquest. The difference is scale. Raids are lightning, conquest is weather. Armies winter over. They take horses. They demand tribute. They begin to reshape local politics by force. If you were with us on a campaign, you'd discover that the most important terrain isn't only battlefields, it's rivers, roads, and defensible towns. Jorvik to the Norse, sits like a prize because it controls trade routes and regional power. Whoever holds it can tax movement, influence alliances, and project force. And you would see that war is often decided before swords meet, through negotiations, betrayals, and the timing of reinforcements. In battle itself, the romantic image of individual duels dissolves into a far more sobering reality. Shield walls are not glamorous, they are pressure. Men push shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears stabbing into gaps, axes hooking shield rims. The ground becomes slick. Noise becomes physical. Iron striking wood, men shouting, the wet punctuation of injury. If you were there, you'd remember not the heroic moments, but the small, terrible details. How quickly a confident man becomes quiet. How easy it is to trip over a body. How fear smells. At night, the army doesn't become peaceful. It becomes exhausted. Fires burn low. Watches are posted. Men speak of home in ways that sound like prayer. And you'd start to understand why figures like Ragnar, real or composite, become gravitational. In unstable worlds, charisma is infrastructure. A leader who can promise victory, distribute wealth, and punish betrayal creates a temporary order stronger than any written law. By the time we sail away again, loaded with goods, maybe with captives, maybe with alliances cut from necessity, you would no longer see England as a distant shore. You would see it as part of a connected world, and you would realize the sea is not a boundary, it's a road. Part 3, the river road to Francia, Paris, and the anatomy of a siege. If England is a green prize, Francia is a machine, wealthy, centralized, and threaded with rivers that function like veins. To reach it, we don't just sail to France. We enter a geographic system designed for trade and taxation, and we turn it into a highway for war. Imagine us steering into the mouth of the Seine. The water changes taste, less salt, more silt. The banks rise and fall in gentle slopes, dotted with farms and villages. Here, the Longship becomes terrifyingly efficient. A coastal defense means little if the attacker can bypass it by rowing inland. Every bend in the river is a question. Is there a garrison ahead, or only a frightened village that will ring bells too late? If you were there, you'd see the panic ripple faster than any messenger. Smoke columns appear where people burn stores rather than let them be taken. Priests carry relics away. Local lords rush to gather men, but gathering men takes time. The river does not wait. Now, about Paris. In the popular imagination, It's the Paris of cathedrals and boulevards. In the 9th century, it is primarily the Ile de la Cité, an island settlement controlling a river crossing. That crossing matters more than beauty. Control the crossing, and you control movement, trade, and strategic passage. The city's defenses are not modern walls, but fortifications that still exploit the simplest truth of warfare, make the attacker slow down. A siege is less about dramatic charges and more about logistics and psychology. You would feel that immediately. Food becomes strategy. Weather becomes strategy. Disease becomes strategy. If we anchor our ships and demand tribute, we are also measuring the enemy's will. Can they hold out? Can they coordinate? Can they pay us to leave? And this is where the Ragnar tradition often places a defining episode. A great attack on Paris, sometimes dated to 845 in later retellings, with an enormous fleet and a Frankish king forced to pay. Whether one man named Ragnar led it exactly as later stories claim is debated, but the event type, the Viking river assault and the payment of tribute, is historically grounded in the period. The Frankish world called such payments Danegeld in later usage, a hard admission that it is cheaper to buy departure than to endure destruction. If you were standing with us on the riverbank, you'd notice how civilization looks when it is frightened. You'd see well-made goods, wine, metalwork, textiles stacked as ransom. You'd see officials negotiating through interpreters, their faces tight with humiliation. And you'd understand that raiding a wealthy society isn't only theft. It's a forced transaction where violence sets the price. But don't imagine the North side as unified. That's another myth. A war leader must constantly manage competing ambitions. Who gets the best share? Who gets to claim the glory? Who thinks the leader is holding back for personal gain? A strong leader gives gifts, but gifts require wealth, and wealth requires success. It's a cycle that either builds a dynasty or collapses into mutiny. The land around the Seine is also different from Scandinavia in a way you'd feel under your feet. It's softer, more cultivated, less rugged. Roads connect settlements more reliably. That means the enemy can move troops more quickly than in the far north, once they decide to. So every day we linger increases the risk that the machine wakes up fully. When the decision finally comes to depart, tribute taken, ships heavy, men restless, you'd watch the river carry us back toward the sea like a conveyor belt. And you'd feel something unsettling. We have learned that even the strongest kingdoms can be shaken if you strike through their geography. The rivers taught us that. Part 4. The weight of a name, Ragnar's end, and what remains. If you stayed in this world long enough, you'd learn that fame is not stable. It grows, distorts, and then hardens into story. Ragnar, whether one man or a legend assembled from several war leaders, becomes exactly that. A story strong enough to outlive the details. Here's what that means on the ground. People begin to talk about Ragnar's way of doing things, daring raids, clever timing, testing the limits of kings. Young fighters use his name like a ladder, something to climb by imitation. Rivals use it like an accusation, something to dismiss as reckless pride. And the truth, as you would experience it, is that a leader in this era is always negotiating with fate. Because fate is simply what happens when you run out of margin for error. The sagas often pull Ragnar toward a dramatic end, captured by a king in England, sometimes named Ella of Northumbria, and killed in a snake pit. That image is so vivid, it sticks in the mind like a barb. Historically, the specific details are uncertain, but the pattern is entirely plausible. A raid that goes wrong, a leader isolated, a local ruler eager to make an example. In a world of vendettas and honor, capturing a famous raider is a political act, not just a military one. If we were there, you would not experience that end as theatrical. You would experience it as shock. One season, a name commands ships. The next season, it is whispered like a warning. And then comes the second wave, retaliation. In the tradition, Ragnar's sons, figures like Ivar, Ubba, and Halfdan, become the engines of a massive campaign in England, often associated with what later chroniclers call the Great Heathen Army. Whether every relationship is literal or partly literary, the historical reality is that large Scandinavian forces did, in the later 9th century winter in England, take major towns and reshape the political map. Conquest, settlement, and governance follow violence. This is where you would feel history shifting under your feet. Raiding changes when settlers arrive. Suddenly, war leaders are not only taking silver, they are taking land. They are negotiating with local elites, marrying into power, converting or pretending to, when it serves stability. Pagan and Christian worlds collide, but not always as pure enemies. Sometimes they blend in pragmatic ways. A Norse leader adopts Christian symbols to rule Christian subjects. A local lord hires Norse fighters as mercenaries. Identity becomes less about blood and more about allegiance, and the landscape itself begins to record the change. Place names shift. Markets grow around garrisons. Fortified towns, burhs in the English system, multiply as defenses become institutional rather than improvised. The sea road remains, but now it carries traders as well as raiders. That is the uncomfortable truth. The Viking Age is not only destruction, it is integration by force. If you asked me what you'd remember most, I don't think it would be the biggest battle or the richest haul. I think you'd remember standing on a ship at dawn, watching mist lift from a river, realizing you're part of a moving frontier. You'd remember the moment you understood that geography is destiny. Fjords produce sailors, islands produce navigators, rivers produce raiders, and wealth produces targets. And you'd remember how a name like Ragnar becomes larger than a person. In the end, that might be the most documentary truth of all. People don't only live history, they manufacture it into stories strong enough to recruit the next generation. Closing note. If you want more stories like this, grounded, immersive, and built like a documentary you can feel, subscribe to the channel and like the video. It's the clearest signal that you want the next journey, and it helps us keep the series going.